Yeah, let's go. Before we start sewing, I always like you to check that you have cut all pattern pieces according to the instructions. You need the front cut mirrored. You need the neckband. If you like to the neckband binding, cut according to the chart on page 5. Also, you need the sleeve mirrored for the cardigan. It's the view C. You need the long sleeve, and you have the back cut on fold. Also, additionally, you need thread in the matching color, and you need 9 buttons in a size approximately 1 centimeter to 1.5 centimeter, so that it matches nicely with the button placket. The first step that we're doing is that we sew together the front pieces and the back piece along at the shoulder seams. It's important that you lay your pieces right sides facing, so the nice size that you will have on the outside when you wear your garment is laid on top of each other. And yeah, for the seam itself, I will use a serger to finish off the seams. You can use a zigzag or a stretchy stitch of your choice. What's important is whatever stitch that you choose, make sure that it also finishes off the edges so that they don't fray. Especially when sewing with knits, this is important because otherwise they will open up and you won't have a long-lasting garment. As I said, I will use the serger. I will show you in a second a small trick to make sure that your seam does not stretch out, which is often the matter or problem with when sewing with knits. Yeah, let's go. On your machine, somewhere on your serger, you have the option to adjust the stitch length. Not in the sense that the stitches are closer together, but in the way that how many stitches on how many amount of fabric are done. So it might be a small wheel to turn here or something like this, a button to press. Just get into your instruction, into your manual and figure out where to do it. But if you put it on a higher number, your fabric will be pulled together while sewing, which means that it won't be stretched out, but on the opposite will be pulled together a little bit and the seam will come out really nicely, especially when sewing with knits. I just do it slightly, so I'm not putting a tutu or something. This would be the normal level. You can also stretch it out. This is not what we want, so we want to have it on a higher number. I always put it to 1.3 when sewing with knits, and I always enjoy my seams very much. Also, a small tip on sewing with pins when sewing on the serger. Make sure that the tip of your needle does not overlap the corner, the edge of your fabric, but stays next to it so that it does not get touched by the knife, because whenever you get a needle under your serger knife, your knife will get damaged, and if this happens too often, your machine gets severely damaged as well. So make sure to either pull it out on time or to make sure that the tip does not get close to the knife. We're setting in the sleeve now. Make sure that you have the sleeve matching the front to the front pattern piece and vice versa. So make sure that you place your sleeve right sides facing and match all the notches. There is also a notch, where is it? Here, for the shoulder seam. So the shoulder seam notch goes to the shoulder seam and the front seam goes to the front. And then you pin it all the way down to the back and sew. We are sewing the side seams now. It's important that you place your front piece right side spacing of your back piece and align it at the side seam. Also, make sure that your underarm seam will look nicely by pinning the sleeve seam in place, that it meets at the same place. And make sure that your ends are pinned in the same spot nicely. Yeah, and just fill in with needles so that nothing moves. And you will do the same for the sleeve. Make sure that the ends meet at the same height and fill in with needles. Again, sew with a stretch stitch of your choice. Also, again here, please press the seams. It's so important when you want to do nice sewing that you don't skip the pressing, so please don't. Before we continue with the next step, I kindly ask you to step into your cardigan and to make sure that the length of the sleeves and the length of your bottom hem is all right. Please do not forget that the seam allowance is included. It's 4 centimeters, so if you want to make sure that you get it right, fold it inside. And also with the sleeve, it's meant to be gathered with the elastic, so there will be a little extra that it does not sit too tight. Please take this into consideration when adjusting the lengths. Before we start to finish the neckband or the hems or anything, we need to prepare the bottom placket. It's important because it needs to be prepared when we sew the neckband on. If you have an extremely stretchy fabric, like outside of the normal range of stretchy, or extremely thin or fine fabric, lightweight, I recommend to you to use a really fine fusible interfacing on the inside of your bottom blanket, on the wrong side of your fabric. Should be 3 centimeters wide as instructed in the booklet, in the instructions. Also, you need to prepare the bottom blanket by finishing off the edges along the front. And you need to cut away this small area at the bottom of your front pieces. You find it in your pattern piece, in your paper pattern, as a gray area. Please be really exact when cutting it. Yeah, it's important that you are precise in this section. After cutting away the small gray area from your front pieces, should be equal, as I said, on both sides, and be precise, please. You fold in the seam allowance. If you used a serger or whatever method of your choice, make sure that no stitches are visible when you do the second step of preparing the bottom placket. After folding in the seam allowance, the finished off edge, you will again fold over 3 centimeters. The line where you should fold is marked in your paper pattern as the fold line. And make sure to be really precise here again, because the bottom blanket is always the most visible area and what the people who look at you will look at first, probably. After doing this on both sides, you will give the bottom placket a good press under your iron Here you can see how much of a change pressing the button placket is. It's important that you now work really precise and that you also press precisely so that you really see the fold line here and that your seam allowance stays where it is at the moment. You unpin the very bottom where you have cut off the gray area, and you fold it over to the front, to the outside of your fabric. So as you see here, this cutoff line and the edge of your seam allowance should align nicely. If you want to be on the safe side, make sure that it's the 3 centimeters as said in the instructions and pin it in place. Now you will sew exactly up to the seam allowance, not into the seam allowance or over the seam allowance, but really you will stop here. Also in your paper pattern you have a mark here to stop here, and you keep the seam allowance as you have it everywhere, 0.7 centimeters or 1/4 inch. As this is such a small seam, it's hard to do it with a serger, so I recommend to you to just use your normal sewing machine and either use a stretchy stitch like a zigzag, or because it's such a small seam, it's also doable with a normal straight seam. After sewing, you can remove the pin and you will fold it back to the outside. So the outside of your fabric is facing you. You don't need to clip any corners. Actually, the fabric inside helps to make a nice corner. Yeah, so turn it inside out. And if you want to be on the safe side, I recommend to you to fold everything nicely back in place as you pressed it previous, and to pin it, and also to give this corner a really nice press. Now we're off to sew the neckband. Just a general information before we start sewing it onto the neckline. The given measurements for your neckband are according to I would say a standard jersey, but depending on your fabric choice, like if you have a wool knit, they tend to stretch more. If you have a jacquard, a knit jacquard, it might stretch less. Please pre-check the length of your neckband by pinning it roughly to the neckline, and to see if it pulls the fabric of the neckline too much together or if there is not enough pull, and adjust if needed. After adjusting your fabric, you will fold it so right sides facing at the short ends, and you will sew along the edge and then fold it back to the so that the outside is on the outside and form the corner nicely. You will do this on both ends. Yeah, I have already prepared the neckband to show you precisely how to do it without any inconvenience. I will undo this quickly. So you have your button blanket. It's pinned to the back at the moment. You will remove the pin and fold it to the front. You have this pressing line here. Your neckband will go exactly up to the pressing line. This will later be the front, and you want this to align nicely. So make sure that when folding over the button blanket, to give a little bit more pull here so that when you serge or sew, your fabric does not move here. Pin in place, and then pin the rest of the button blanket. Your neckband is sandwiched in between the front and the back of your button blanket. Make sure that you have your 3 centimeters, not more, and pin it in place. You would do the same at the other side of your button blanket, of your front, and distribute the neckband nicely in between. Match the notches at the shoulder, and if you don't do a neckband binding, you can straight go to sewing. So if you choose to do the neckband binding, you will need this 2 cm wide piece of jersey, or if you like to, you can also use the fabric that you picked for your cardigan. You just make sure it's not too bulky. And so if you don't want to have it visible, it's a nice way to hide it. In the instructions, I show you how to do it for the neck area, like the back of your neckline, but I also would like to show you how to do it. This is nothing that isn't in the instruction, but it's something that I'd like to show as well. I would do a full neckband bind. So no matter if you're just doing the neckband bind in the back of your neckline, or if you want to do it all the way around, then you just need to cut it longer as instructed. It's basically that you put it right sides facing on your neckline. It's an extra layer that you add to the neckline. You will then sew, fold it over, and kind of wrap it around the seam at your neckline so that it's invisible. So if you want to do fully around the neckline done neckband binding, you will start to pin it in the same place where your pressed over seam allowance from the bottom placket is. You don't want it to go straight to the corner because it's just unnecessarily bulky. You will pin it on top of the neckband, so not on the side where your bodice is, but on the neckband, right side facing, with a nice stretch. If you're opting for the neckband binding only in the neck area, you would do as instructed in the pattern. You have your shoulder seam here, and you will pin it right next to where the shoulder seam ends, so it's not overlapping but right next to each other on opposite sides. You will pin it there by folding it a ½ centimeter to the inside, right sides facing, and then same as with the neckband, you put a little stretch on it and pin it on top of the neckband. You will do the same ending on the opposite side of your shoulder, on the other shoulder. So that's basically all, and then you sew it. If you wonder how to do the final finish, we will do it later when we finish the whole garment and have already the hems and the elastics inside. So I always feel this is a nice last step to add to the garment. We start to sew the hems now. Before we start to fold over the seam allowance and everything, I kindly ask you to finish off all the hem seams. So basically it's the bottom edge and the edges at your sleeves. After you finished off the edge with the stretch method of your choice, I choose the serger, you will fold in the seam allowance of 4 centimeters to the wrong side of the fabric. Make sure that you use a measurement because you want to pull through an elastic that has a fixed width, so make sure that you work precisely, that it really fits through the tunnel. Also here it's okay, we need this overlap of the seam allowance, so this will be hidden under the bottom blanket later. For the sleeves you do the same, you fold it 4 centimeters to the inside and pin it in place. After pinning the hem allowance at the sleeves and at the bottom hem, I really urge you to transfer the X notch in whatever way you want to. I did this chalk marking to the hem allowance, and it's important that it's exactly where it's in the paper pattern, because you don't want the seam of your hem to go into the button placket but to stop exactly where the button placket is sewn later on. Yeah. I have recommended a stitch in the instructions to sew the hem. It's a narrow zigzag. I did not recommend the cover lock, not because it's not good, but because most of the sews don't have one. So if you have a cover lock, for sure you can use it, even though it's a little bit difficult if you have this opening to thread through the elastic at the sleeve, for example, to continue the cover lock seam at exactly the same point. So probably the zigzag that I have recommended in the instructions is the best choice. You can just run it here over your finished edge, and the edge is secured and the seam will be stretchy, so it's a really nice trick to keep it stretchy but simple. To show the stitch that I have recommended, it's a normal zigzag just with adjusted stitch width. Normally it's 4, and you just bring it down to 2, and the stitch length stays the same. It's 1.5 here. After pressing your seam flat, I always recommend to do that because when sewing with a machine on a knits, it stretches out, but when you press it, it gets back into its former shape again. We are ready to insert the elastics. You have some recommended lengths given in the instructions, but as always with elastics, everybody is different. So I like to ask you to insert it, but not cut it off, but probably mark the length that is recommended, and then quickly put on the jacket and see if it's right for you, because that way you can shorten or lengthen it to a width that is comfortable for you around the hips. Same for the sleeve. I always recommend that the width that is at your kind of lower middle, lower arm is the best, because then you can still pull up the sleeves, but it does not fall over your hand while wearing, but it's not too tight. So this is what I would recommend as a good length, and whatever you're doing now, do remember that you need 0.5 centimeter seam allowance at each end of your elastic. So you need a safety pin or one of those things that you attach to it to thread it through the tunnel, and you will start on one side and just easily thread it through, and make sure that it does not slip into the tunnel fully, but that you secure the ends. So once you've finished threading through your elastic, make sure that you don't let it slip into your tunnel, as I already said, but let it produce into the button placket. And now you pin the seam allowance of your hem allowance, so many allowances, the way that you hide it together with the elastic under your button placket. You will fix it, you will sew it that it does not move anymore when you do the edge stitching on your button placket, which will be the next step. If you did a fully covering neckband binding like I did for this version, it's not in the instructions, as I said, it's crucial that you now hide it under the button placket before you start to edge stitch it, because otherwise this will not work. If you did it only in the back, you can do it later, it doesn't matter, but it's the same procedure. You just hide it under your neckband seam, kind of wrap it around it, and then you pin it well. Yeah. And now we're off to finish the button plackets. You prepare your elastic in the same way as you did for the bottom hem, and you push it through the tunnel of your sleeve hems, and make sure that it does not pull into the sleeve hem with the end. And when you're done, you will connect both ends with each other by overlapping them half a centimeter and sewing them together, and you will close the opening. For sewing the bottom blanket, you use an edge stitch your foot, and you will simply edge stitch straight down with the straight stitch. Also important, do not stitch the neckband, but start at the neckband seam and go all the way down to the bottom blanket end. Make sure that you also catch all layers, that your elastic and your seam allowance from the hem allowance is also sewn. We do finish the button placket now. It's important that you pre-check before you sew the buttonholes and the buttons that the placement is right for you and your body. Make sure that you have one exactly on your chest so that it does not gap here while wearing, and distribute 9 buttons evenly along the button blanket. One is in the neckband and one is here at the bottom. We are going to sew buttonholes on a stretchy fabric. It's always a little bit tricky, but I have two ways to success. One you might already have at home. It's the Scotch tape. You can place it on the area where you want to do the buttonhole. You can easily draw on the Scotch tapes. It's easy to remove. You can just mark the buttonhole and sew it. The benefit is that it does not stretch anymore, but when you remove the Scotch tape after sewing the buttonhole, your fabric will be normal and the buttonhole does not stretch and will turn out really nice. A second variant to do buttonholes on stretchy fabric is my favorite, personally. There is this kind of water-soluble embroidery tissue that you can glue like Scotch tape or any, it's itself is adhesive, but it's also easily to remove, but you don't need to remove it actually. You can just place it on the area, stick it to it where you want to do your buttonhole. You mark your buttonhole, you sew the buttonhole. That fabric will not stretch because it's not stretchy. But then you just use like lukewarm water and remove it fully. The benefit from using the embroidery tissue compared to the Scotch tape is that with the Scotch tape, sometimes you have some residue in the seam itself, which makes it a little bit less flexible and harder. With the water-soluble embroidery tissue, it fully gets removed and you don't have any residues. These are the buttonholes that I did with this embroidery tissue, and you can see they turned out really nice. Just cut off excess threads and wash out the tissue. Then we are ready to open the buttonholes. Place a pin at the beginning and the end at the inside of the seam. That's important because you don't want to rip open the seam. And then you can either with a buttonhole knife or with a seam ripper, I personally just use the seam ripper, you can open the buttonholes. Now we finish the second side of the button placket. We need to sew on the buttons. Remember, if you made any adjustments on the buttonhole widths, like the distance of them, you need to do the same adjustment for the buttons. So make sure that you have it all in the same place on the opposite side, and then you just sew on the buttons at the center front line, either by hand or by machine, that's your choice, and then we're done.